The scent of overbrewed coffee always meant one of two things at Stellar Flow Systems: a system crash or a termination notice. And the servers had been running smoothly that morning. Tessa Vance, Director of Client Logistics, stared at the Slack message that pinged at 4:56 p.m. on a Friday, just before a long weekend. "I need everyone's project updates by 5. No exceptions." Of course, it came from Gavin. Of course, it was vague, bordering on hostile, and designed to ignite panic. And of course, no one publicly responded. Everyone at Stellar Flow knew better than to make noise when Gavin was circling the water cooler with that artificial smile and a hidden agenda. Tessa sighed, cracked her neck, and opened her project tracker. 34 active projects, 14 urgent escalations, 2 failed vendor integrations, not her fault, but somehow linked to her name, and 1 massive West Coast contract hanging by a thread. Not her mess, but definitely her cleanup assignment. Her official title was Senior Logistics Analyst, but that translated to the person who fixes everyone else's blunders while receiving 0 credit. She was the one who re-optimized freight loads when the routing software malfunctioned. She was the one who identified double-billed shipments and misfiled customs declarations. She was the one who flagged the component shortage in Arizona before it escalated into a costly lawsuit. But the acknowledgments never materialized. At best, she received Gavin's classic one-liner. "That's why we keep you around, Tessa." He said it as if she were a paperclip, useful, flexible, easily misplaced in a desk drawer. To the executives, Gavin was golden, tall, immaculately dressed, with a charming smile and just enough exaggerated tales from his early career to sound authoritative. He could captivate a boardroom and then subtly shift blame onto a subordinate in the same breath, and they'd thank him for the ride. He knew the industry buzzwords, he knew the numbers, and he knew how to appear concerned just long enough to evade accountability. To his team, however, he was a ticking time bomb in dress shoes. The shift began 6 weeks ago. It was a quiet Monday morning when Tessa opened the logistics tracker and noticed a critical rerouting order on the West Coast distribution contract. It was a vital client: precision components, strict delivery windows, temperature-controlled shipments. Someone had approved changes that pushed a third of the fleet through a congested corridor near San Jose, ostensibly cutting costs but significantly increasing risk. She checked the logs. Approved by Gavin with a timestamp. No prior consultation. She stared at the entry for a long time before sending a cautious message. "Hey Gavin, just noticed the reroute. Want to ensure we're accounting for recent traffic near I-5, potential for delays." His reply arrived 7 minutes later. "Appreciate the vigilance, Tessa. Let's be agile. Cost savings here are key. No formal meeting, no risk assessment, no contingency plan. Just be agile. Corporate code for shut up and let the boss gamble." 3 weeks later, the entire contract imploded. 4 shipments missed their crucial delivery windows. 1 truck carrying sensitive medical sensors was delayed 12 hours in a gridlocked highway snarl. The client filed a complaint, then a formal claim, then came the lawsuit, $22.6 million in damages. And somehow, no one was discussing the reroute. Tessa kept her head down. She observed Gavin manage the panic like a PR maestro. Sympathetic in meetings, confident in emails, and visibly stressed just enough to elicit pity from leadership. Meanwhile, his demeanor towards her changed. He became colder, more distant. Her calendar invites with him disappeared. Slack replies stopped mid-thread. Performance reviews, once glowing, were suddenly pending reevaluation. It didn't take a genius to understand. She was being isolated from the team, from the decisions, from him. Not a clean break, just enough separation so that when the blame finally exploded, the fallout would land squarely on her. Still, Tessa held her breath and remained quiet. That was her expertise: staying invisible, remaining indispensable. Her desk was situated in the shadowed corner of the 8th floor, beside the server cabinet and an unreplaced, expired fire extinguisher. She didn't have lunch with colleagues. She didn't participate in Slack channels. She'd built a career out of being professionally unnoticeable. That was the intention, as long as she kept the operations running smoothly and quietly. No one scrutinized too closely. No one noticed the extra hours, the fixes she performed off the clock, the calls she took from agitated clients to protect the company's reputation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. In corporate America, stability is a powerful sedative. But as she observed the growing silence surrounding the lawsuit, the way Gavin's voice escalated in meetings whenever her name was mentioned, the sudden disappearance of shared drive folders she'd accessed for years, Tessa knew stability wouldn't rescue her this time. The email arrived like a cold slap to the back of her neck. Subject: Urgent legal hold notification. It was from compliance. No greeting, no pleasantries, just a sterile block of text stating that due to pending litigation regarding the Western Corridor client, all relevant digital and physical files must be preserved. No deletions, no edits. Legal was initiating a document review process. Tessa's inbox was one of several flagged for immediate collection. She reread it twice. Her stomach lurched. By noon, whispers spread through the floor like wildfire. Someone from legal, in a sleek suit, moved from desk to desk with a laptop and a portable scanner. A few junior analysts were summoned to meeting rooms and emerged looking pale, clutching USB drives as if they contained confessions. Tessa's desk was conspicuously skipped. At first, she thought perhaps she'd avoided something. But that was worse. She was being excluded, not overlooked. At 2:13 p.m., she received a message from Gavin. Short, clinical. Let's touch base this week. FYI, you're CC'd on the legal hold. Nothing to worry about. She stared at it as if it were a ticking device. Gavin never touched base. He commanded meetings, and nothing to worry about in legalese translated to, someone's head is about to roll, and I hope it's not mine. Tessa pulled up her calendar. Oddly, the West Corridor strategy session from a few weeks prior, the one where Gavin had presented the cost-cutting rewrote to her and two senior analysts, was gone. She remembered it vividly. She had even taken notes. She checked her local Outlook archive. Gone, too. She scoured her inbox. No meeting invite, no record. But she remembered everything. The whiteboard with the crude diagram, Gavin's speech about profit margins, the way he dismissed Liam's warning about weather risks with a smirk, and a joke about letting operations deal with the fallout. That was the meeting. The precise moment the entire operation went off the rails. And now, it didn't exist. Heart pounding, she pulled up the chat thread with Gavin in Teams. She scrolled back, looking for the conversation where she'd asked if he'd cleared the reroute with legal. Nothing. The message was gone. She felt her face flush, a cold wave washing over her arms. Someone had deleted it, or rather, he had. Tessa wasn't foolish. Gavin had admin access, and he was cunning. He knew when to be assertive and when to be invisible. Deleting chat history wasn't just suspicious. It was a surgical maneuver, clean, quiet, and traceable if executed early enough. She stood up and walked to the kitchen, poured herself lukewarm coffee from the pot that hadn't been refreshed since breakfast. Her reflection in the microwave looked distorted, as if she were watching someone else occupy her skin. When she sat back down, another ping from Gavin. Subject: Quick sync. Hey, want to do a quick sync tomorrow on some upcoming projects? Just aligning resources. Aligning resources? She almost laughed. She wasn't being included. She was being documented. This was him building a case, a trail of breadcrumbs so that when the blame came, it would appear as though she had been involved, informed, perhaps even complicit. Her mouse hovered over the reply button, but she didn't type anything. Not yet. Instead, she opened a personal spreadsheet hidden on her OneDrive, simply titled Work Notes. It was her own insurance policy, started years ago after witnessing 3 colleagues get reorganized into unemployment, each with glowing reviews right up until their dismissal. She scrolled through months of timestamps, meeting summaries, names, Slack quotes, and there it was. Feb 6. Gavin pitched WC reroute in War Room. Emphasis on budget cuts. Overrode Liam's concern. Told me logistics will adapt like they always do. She copied it into a new document, just in case. By the end of the day, she noticed more subtle signs. The senior operations chat was unusually quiet whenever she chimed in. Liam had become distant. Her project dashboard permissions were downgraded. No more editing shipment flow models. And Gavin? He was making his rounds with executives like a charlatan preacher before a dying congregation. Hands moving rapidly, voice smooth as honey, selling a gospel of plausible deniability. She wanted to scream. But screaming in corporate America only labels you a liability. Instead, she opened her Outlook again and attempted to search for every meeting, every file, every approval chain related to the reroute. Half of it was missing. The other half was simply altered, moved, renamed, detached from their original threads, like bones extracted from a grave. By 7:43 p.m., the office was mostly dark. The cleaning crew had started mopping near the elevators. Tessa sat in her corner cubicle, screen glowing, fingers frozen. She whispered it aloud, as if speaking it might make it feel less surreal. He's erasing me. And somewhere deep down, beneath the churning fear and nausea, another feeling began to surface. Tight, quiet, and burning. Not panic, not despair. Fury. The email was chilling enough to make her fingers tremble. Subject: deposition, preparation, mandatory attendance. The sender: Jessica Walsh, Associate Counsel, Stellar Flow Systems. Tessa read it 3 times before closing her eyes and pressing her knuckles into her temples. It was happening. They were calling her in. It was framed as routine, as part of the legal team's due diligence in support of the defense. But Tessa knew exactly what it meant. They were lining up the targets, and she was target number 2, right behind Gavin, feathers soaked in gasoline. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply got up, walked to the office bathroom, locked the farthest stall, and sat with her elbows on her knees and her head in her hands for 13 full minutes. Then she wiped her face, returned to her desk, and booked a meeting room for herself. Private, off the grid, just 30 minutes. Not for a call, not for a cry, but for the first act of self-defense. She opened a blank document, titled it Deposition Timeline, and began typing everything. Every approval, every Slack exchange she could recall. Every conversation where Gavin hinted at risk and brushed it off. Every time he used phrases like cut the noise, push it through. Risk is the cost of speed. She wasn't going to be caught unprepared in front of lawyers. If they wanted her memory, she'd give it to them with timestamps, direct quotes, and irrefutable evidence. But they weren't going to like what she remembered. The prep meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. Legal sent a formal calendar invite with 4 people copied. Her, Jessica Walsh, some outside counsel named Robert Rob Carter, and Gavin Mitchell. Gavin replied first. Looking forward to clarifying next steps. Thanks, team. Clarifying, as if they were coordinating a charity bake sale, not navigating a $22.6 million lawsuit. The morning of the meeting, Tessa dressed meticulously. Dark blazer, minimal makeup, hair clean and pulled back. The look conveyed reliability, non-threatening loyalty, but not a pushover. Her stomach churned. She chewed half a mint and dry swallowed it. Conference room 4A was glass-walled and over-air conditioned. Jessica smiled as if she were about to deliver a keynote on effective time management. Rob, the outside counsel, was a square-jawed man with a permanently furrowed brow and the kind of voice you'd expect to narrate true crime documentaries. Gavin was already there, legs crossed, pen in hand, looking relaxed, too relaxed. He'd already rehearsed his lines and constructed his safety net. He gave Tessa a nod, as if they were allies, as if he hadn't systematically dismantled her digital history. "Thanks for coming in, Tessa," Jessica said, clasping her hands like a substitute teacher. "We just want to go through what to expect in the deposition. You'll be representing the company, of course, and we're counting on your professionalism and clarity." That last part lingered in the air like a hint of something toxic. Rob took over, explaining legal phrasing, strategy, body language. Be concise. Be confident. Don't speculate. Don't guess. If you don't remember something, say so. Then came Jessica again. "We want to present a unified narrative," she said, almost offhand. "This is about protecting Stellar Flow's reputation. We're encouraging the team to approach this with cohesion in mind. Show that operations acted responsibly and decisions were collective. Translation: say it was all of you, say it wasn't him." Gavin said nothing, just nodded slightly, as if this all made perfect sense. They handed her a printed brief of talking points, euphemisms disguised in neutral corporate grammar, phrases like strategy realignment instead of reroute, operational adjustment instead of risk miscalculation. Her name was nowhere in the draft. She could see the outline of the shadow they were attempting to push her into. She nodded too, said she understood, keeping her face expressionless. When the meeting ended, Gavin clapped her on the back. "You'll do great," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Just stick to the framework. We've got your back, Tessa." Tessa turned slowly and looked him directly in the face. "Thanks," she said. "Good to know." She walked out of that glass cage and made a straight line to the IT help desk. She waited 10 minutes behind a guy who couldn't recall his password, then leaned in and casually asked if she could get a list of her account login and file access history. Just trying to clean up before Q2 audits. The tech guy didn't ask why. He printed the log summary. Back at her desk, Tessa opened it and highlighted the login anomalies. 2 entries stood out. Weekends she hadn't worked, but her account had been active. File edits she hadn't made. Gavin had been inside her folders. She took a photo with her personal phone, then carefully deleted the email log off the shared printer tray before anyone could see it. That night, she didn't go straight home. She stopped at a 24-hour print shop, printing the emails she'd archived to her private drive, emails that had long since vanished from the shared system. She laminated the 2 most damning ones. One had Gavin explicitly saying, "This one's aggressive, but if it backfires, ops can spin it as their call." She stared at that line for a long time. If they were going to spin this, she was going to give them something sharp enough to shred their hands. "What?" Tessa's voice cracked out of her throat before she could control it. Jessica didn't flinch, just tilted her head with that same professional composure she likely practiced in the mirror. Gavin's testimony thus far has characterized the reroute as improvised. He stated it wasn't officially approved by upper management and that the operations team initiated adjustments without strategic alignment. Tessa stared, jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Improvised, strategic alignment. They were transforming her into a rogue saboteur with a spreadsheet and a vendetta. She looked at the document in front of her, their updated narrative, typed and double-spaced like a screenplay about her own slow-motion career assassination. Jessica continued, smooth as silk. "He isn't blaming you directly, to be clear. He's emphasizing a communication breakdown. Our goal here is to contain exposure. Everyone's trying to be a team player. That phrase, team player, the last thing you hear before you're handed a box and escorted to the elevator." "Do I get to respond?" Tessa asked, folding her hands in her lap to hide how hard they were shaking. "You'll be deposed under oath. You'll have your moment," Jessica said. "But it helps if we stay aligned. The goal isn't finger-pointing. It's a cohesive timeline. Gavin has seniority, and the board's eyes are on this." Tessa looked out the conference room window, watching the blur of passing suits beyond the glass, like fish swimming past a shark tank. None of them would look in. None of them would ask questions. The door opened and Gavin strolled in, late, coffee in hand, jacket slung over one shoulder as if he were headed to brunch instead of rewriting history. "Morning," he said, nodding to no one in particular. "Ready to keep the dream alive?" Jessica smiled. Tessa did not. The next hour was excruciating. Gavin recited his talking points as if he'd memorized them in a mirror. Calculated pauses, humble deflections, sly wording. My knowledge, as I recall. There was confusion over Tessa's drafts. He shifted the blame with the grace of a concert pianist, never pointing directly, just gently nudging. "Tessa," Jessica said finally. "Any comments?" She looked up slowly. Gavin smiled at her as if they were still collaborators. "No," she said. "I'm listening." She walked out of that meeting and didn't return to her desk. Instead, she went straight to the parking garage, sat in her car, and screamed into her steering wheel until her throat was raw. Then she drove home, cranked up her old personal laptop, the one she hadn't touched since 2021, back when she still believed hard work alone protected you. The emails were all there. Dozens of backups. She'd saved them out of habit, not foresight. She pulled up one dated February 6th, titled West Corridor Route Revision, Final Push Strategy, sent from Gavin to her, with a bullet list of cost-saving changes, risk disclaimers he'd dismissed with, "We'll massage this later if it gets noisy," and a big, bold sentence at the bottom. "This direction has my sign-off. Let's move forward by EOD. I'll handle optics if legal twitches." He had signed it with his digital signature. He'd even copied Liam, but that wasn't the ultimate proof. 3 clicks deeper, she found the smoking gun, a forwarded email chain from Gavin to her with the previous email attached, sent to him by the CFO. Subject: Approval for WC route revamp. Confirming the CFO had written, "As long as this achieves your cost targets and our client accepts the delivery specs, proceed. I trust your team can manage operations fallout." Gavin's reply was smug. "Copy that. Tessa will coordinate implementation." There it was, not just Gavin. Corporate knowledge. The CFO. The exact moment the company had chosen savings over safety. She stared at the email for a long time. Then she printed it, laminated it, slid it into a folder marked Testimony. The next morning at the office, her colleagues avoided her gaze. The usual coffee chat crowd in the break room fell silent when she walked in. Liam didn't say hello. Rick, who used to joke with her during load checks, now found his shoes fascinating. She was radioactive now, untouchable. Even HR had gone dark. No check-ins, no one asking how she was coping. Silence by design. She was no longer Tessa, the analyst. She was the body floating just outside the lifeboat, waiting to be claimed or cut loose. But as she sat back down at her desk, flipping through the laminated printouts like tarot cards, she felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not rage. It was colder than both. Resolve. The room smelled like toner and fear. They held the deposition in a sterile conference suite at an off-site law firm downtown. Walls the color of wet paper, fluorescent lights too bright, thermostat set to Arctic misery. Tessa sat at the long oval table in a stiff gray chair, palms flat against the varnished wood to conceal the tremble in her fingers. Across from her, the opposing counsel, a woman named Deborah Vance, sharp blazer, sharper smile, eyes like polished stone. To her left, the court reporter. To her right, Stellar Flow's lawyer, Jessica, attempting to appear unfazed. And next to her, Gavin, polished, calm, wearing a steel blue tie and the confidence of a man who'd already sold his fabricated story. "Let the record reflect," Deborah began, voice clipped. "This is the sworn deposition of Gavin Samuel Mitchell, director of strategic logistics at Stellar Flow Systems, Inc., conducted under subpoena as part of Civil Case 23CV 1982. Gavin gave a humble nod. Happy to clarify everything, of course. Tessa didn't breathe, just stared at her reflection in the surface of the polished table. It looked like someone else. Older, flatter, too still. They guided Gavin through the basics, credentials, history. Then came the piercing question. Can you describe the decision-making process that led to the rerouting of West Corridor shipments in Q1? He didn't flinch. Certainly. There were discussions about cost efficiency. As I understood it, Tessa Vance had drafted a proposal for a revised routing strategy. Deborah tilted her head. Ms. Vance initiated the strategy? She circulated the preliminary framework, Gavin said, eyes fixed forward. I reviewed it, but did not authorize implementation. To my knowledge, the changes were enacted before formal sign-off. Jessica didn't move. Neither did Tessa. The court reporter's fingers clicked like tiny knives. Deborah smiled faintly. You're saying the strategy was executed without your explicit approval? I'm saying there may have been a misalignment in communication. In retrospect, it was not clearly routed through the appropriate chain of command. No emotion, no sweat, just enough vagueness to bury her alive. When he finished, he folded his hands like a priest at a funeral. Tessa's funeral. Deborah turned to her. Ms. Vance, are you ready? She swallowed. Yes. The reporter raised a hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, under penalty of perjury? Tessa nodded. I do. Deborah leaned in, tapping her pen twice on her legal pad. Let's talk about the decision to reroute the Western Corridor shipments. In your own words, how did that strategy come to life? Tessa paused. The silence stretched too long. She could feel Jessica bristle beside her. Her heart hammered. Her mouth went dry. She imagined the walls closing in, executives shaking their heads, Gavin's voice echoing, misalignment in communication. And then she reached into her bag. She pulled out a slim manila folder, opened it slowly, and laid 3 laminated sheets flat on the table side by side. Her hand trembled as she nudged them forward. I'd like to submit these into the record, she said. These are emails confirming Mr. Mitchell's direct approval of the reroute, including one sent to me. Another where the CFO was copied and explicitly signed off on the changes. Jessica shifted sharply in her seat. Deborah's eyes flicked down. The first email, Gavin's green light. The second, his reply to the CFO. The third, a summary he sent to Tessa afterward. Let's move fast on this. Legal will adapt. Deborah didn't touch them, just scanned with her eyes. Where did these emails come from? She asked. I archived them before the shared system was altered, Tessa said. She looked up, just a flicker of something behind her stone gaze. Not approval, not gratitude, just recognition, like a chess player clocking a crucial move. And to your knowledge, are these accurate and unaltered? Yes. Gavin's voice broke in. These weren't part of the official... Deborah held up a hand. You'll have a chance to respond. Tessa exhaled slowly, felt the heat rise in her chest. Not the searing burn of panic, but the low, steady fire of something deeper. Gavin wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the emails like they were bombs he thought he'd buried in a shallow grave. Jessica cleared her throat. We'd like a moment to review these, but... Deborah was already speaking into the mic. Let the record reflect that the witness has submitted 3 email exhibits for review, which directly contradict previous testimony. The court reporter typed faster. Gavin adjusted his tie, said nothing. Tessa sat back, spine rigid, heart pounding so loudly she could feel it in her teeth. She had done it. She had lit the fuse and passed the match to the opposition. She wasn't safe. She wasn't protected. But she wasn't silent anymore, and there was no going back. The next morning, The conference room felt different, stiffer, quieter. The coffee on the sideboard hadn't even been touched. An omen, if there ever was one. Everyone had returned for a follow-up review of the now infamous emails Tessa had submitted. The mood had curdled. Jessica looked like she hadn't slept. Her blazer was wrinkled. Her hands trembled faintly as she laid out her legal pad. Gavin hadn't said a word since he walked in. No greeting, no nod, no fake charm. He just sat down and started tapping one leg under the table like a dying engine. Opposing counsel had changed too. Deborah Vance was still poised, but her tone had evolved, less clinical, more deliberate, less curiosity, more bite. She held up one of the laminated printouts with the kind of reverence normally reserved for explosive devices. "Let's walk through these, shall we?" She cleared her throat and read aloud in a flat, deliberate cadence. "This direction has my sign-off. Let's move forward by EOD. I'll handle optics if legal twitches." She paused, looked up and smiled faintly. "Well," she said, "that's going to be a problem." She didn't need to raise her voice. The room was already silent. Jessica shifted in her seat, opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gavin leaned back just slightly, as if trying to create physical distance between himself and the paper now implicating him in crystal clarity. His cheeks had gone a shade paler. He tried to adjust his tie, but his fingers faltered halfway through the knot. Deborah laid the second email flat. "As long as this achieves your cost targets and our client accepts the delivery specs, proceed." From the CFO, 2 weeks before the reroute. Then, "Copy that. Tessa will coordinate implementation." Gavin replying. Jessica finally spoke. "We'd like to verify the full email headers in the archival source." "They're legitimate," Tessa cut in, voice calm. Clipped. "I pulled them from my personal archive, auto-forwarded backups, time-stamped. I've already submitted the metadata." Jessica blinked. "You did that yesterday? You were still preparing your revised timeline?" "Yes." Deborah leaned back, folding her hands on the table. "I'd advise your legal team to reassess their strategy. The narrative about unauthorized process changes is no longer sustainable." She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The silence in the room was oxygenless, a vacuum waiting for the next sound to break it. Gavin opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I wasn't trying to mislead. There were gaps, misunderstandings." Deborah raised a hand. "You're under oath, Mr. Mitchell. That's your warning." Jessica scribbled furiously in her notes. Gavin looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. Tessa sat motionless, every muscle tensed, but her mind was clear. No triumph. Not yet. No vindication. Just breathing for the first time in weeks. Breathing without feeling like her own lungs were betraying her. She wasn't just surviving the fire. She was becoming fireproof. By the end of the day, the company's legal team had postponed further testimony. Jessica made a vague, scripted comment about new materials requiring reassessment. Gavin all but vanished after the meeting. No goodbyes, no fake grin, just the hollow echo of expensive shoes down the marble hallway. Tessa packed up in silence. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't go back to her desk, just walked out of the building and down 3 blocks to the lot where she parked, watching the sidewalk in front of her as if it were made of glass. She drove home with the windows down, the cold air biting at her knuckles. It was the first time in weeks she hadn't sat at a red light rehearsing lies she'd be asked to tell. She didn't eat dinner, just made tea and sat cross-legged on the couch, staring at the laminated emails she'd spread across her coffee table like tarot cards again. They didn't scare her now. They weren't grenades anymore. They were anchors. Proof that she hadn't imagined it, that she wasn't crazy, that she hadn't fabricated the whole damn thing in her head just to survive. At 9:47 p.m., her personal inbox pinged. Subject: Follow up on West Corridor routing. It was from an email address she didn't recognize, a Gmail. She opened it cautiously. Hi, Tessa. My name is Morgan Reed. I'm a reporter with the Ledger. I received an anonymous tip this afternoon regarding the West Corridor case in Stellar Flow Systems. The source mentioned reroute approvals, internal mismanagement, and even referenced specific terminology I've only seen in your project documentation. Would you be open to speaking off the record? I believe this story is bigger than anyone inside Stellar Flow realizes. Tessa read the message 3 times. Anonymous tip with phrases only she used in her files. Phrasing that wasn't public, wasn't in any deposition, wasn't even on the email she'd submitted. She stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the empty street. Inside, the company had broken rank. Someone had whispered her truth into a megaphone. And now the world might be listening. It started at 8:02 a.m. sharp. An all-company calendar pinged a new invite. WC contract, executive level status review, mandatory. Sender, CFO Ramesh Gupta. Attendees, legal, ops, HR, finance. No explanation, no agenda, just one word in the body. Required. Tessa didn't have to attend. She wasn't high enough in the pecking order. But she received the second-hand fallout quickly. Her Slack lit up with silent reactions. The company's quiet digital language of panic. Eye emojis, skull icons, a gif of a man falling through ice. Rumors poured in before noon. The CFO had walked into the meeting red-faced and silent, dropped a printed copy of Gavin's emails on the table and said, "How long did we think this wouldn't surface?" Someone said Gavin tried to deflect again, blamed process confusion. The CFO responded by slamming his pen down and ordering a full internal audit of chain of command correspondence going back 12 months, effective immediately. Tessa didn't smile, but a part of her, the part that had been gaslit and stepped on and quietly erased, sat up a little straighter in her chair. At 2:17 p.m., she received the call. "Hi, Tessa, it's Sarah from HR. Can you swing by?" Neutral tone, no tremble, no cheer. She walked down the carpeted hall as if she were headed to a firing squad. But when she entered the HR suite, Sarah greeted her with a thin smile and slid a folder across the table. "We want to support your next chapter," she said. Tessa blinked. "Excuse me?" Sarah's tone was syrupy but brittle. "We're offering transition packages. No pressure, of course. Just if you want a graceful exit, 3-month severance, positive reference. We can shape the narrative however you like." Shape the narrative. There it was again, language like fabric softener over bloodstains. Tessa flipped the folder shut and placed it gently back on the desk. "I'm not going anywhere." Sarah stiffened. "We just thought, given the stress—" "I'm not the one who should be leaving," Tessa said, her voice level. "And I don't need anyone shaping my story." She stood, didn't wait to be dismissed. The moment she stepped back into the hall, it felt different. The silence around her had changed tone, not isolation, but observation. People were watching her now, measuring, whispering, not with pity, something closer to awe. Back at her desk, she found a plain white envelope slid under her keyboard. No label, no sender, just a sticky note stuck to the top. "Thought you should know. A friend inside." It was a printed list, names, dates, subject lines, a breadcrumb trail of internal messages between Gavin and legal going back 4 months. The earliest, draft strategy to minimize Vance exposure. The latest, prepare for shift in narrative. Vance unlikely to comply. She stared at that phrase for a full minute. Unlikely to comply. As if she were a fire drill that had refused to behave. At 4:56 p.m., she received another email. Different tone, different weight. Subject, confidential potential opportunity. From Deborah Vance. "Hi, Tessa. I'd like to speak with you off the record. Your deposition was illuminating. Our firm is currently expanding its corporate compliance practice. Your insight, poise, and documentation impressed several senior partners. We believe someone like you could help companies avoid the kind of structural blind spots that led to Stellar Flow's situation. Would you be open to a confidential conversation this week? Best, Deborah. Tessa didn't respond right away. She stared at the email, the cursor blinking in the reply box like it knew her next move mattered. Outside, the sky was sliding from steel gray into dusk. Office lights flickered on, floor by floor. A month ago, she'd been another middle manager, buried under bad decisions, a name on a spreadsheet, a soft target. Now the people who tried to erase her were spinning, falling, panicking. She hadn't burned the bridge. She'd made them walk off it, blindfolded. She clicked reply. Typed one word. Yes. It hit the company like a lightning bolt wrapped in silk. Gavin Mitchell is on administrative leave pending internal review. The memo was 2 sentences long, buried at the bottom of the morning briefing email like a throwaway footnote. No context, no timeline. Just gone. But the building hummed with it. Slack lit up in silent reactions. Popcorn emojis, wide-eyed gifs, the occasional bold soul whispering, "Holy shit." Tessa didn't say a word, just closed her inbox, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the cheap drop ceiling tiles like they might crack open and rain justice. Gavin's office door stayed shut all day. His nameplate disappeared before lunch. By 3 p.m., they were wheeling his monitor out on a dolly, like a body bag with an HDMI port. The sharks smelled blood, and suddenly, Tessa wasn't invisible anymore. First came the DMs from coworkers she hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, just wanted to say what you did was brave. If you're leaving, would you consider being a reference?" Always knew something was off with Gavin. Glad someone stood up. She answered most of them politely. Some she ignored, a few, especially the ones that had gone radio silent when things got dark, she left on read. Then came the flowers, a small bouquet from Liam, who hadn't looked her in the eye since the reroute disaster. No card, just a sticky note. "We should have said something sooner." She left them in the break room. That afternoon, Tessa met Deborah Vance for coffee. Not suits, just 2 women in a corner booth, hands wrapped around mugs, and a shared understanding that no recording devices were present. Deborah got straight to the point. "Our firm wants you, not as a token, as a strategist. Compliance consulting. Full autonomy. We're onboarding 5 new corporate clients after this case broke. Every one of them terrified of becoming Stellar Flow." Tessa stirred her coffee. "You want me to stop this from happening again?" Deborah smiled. "I want you to teach them why it happened in the first place." The offer came with a 6-figure salary, benefits that didn't feel like bait, and the freedom to flag red alerts before they escalated into lawsuits. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a reversal. The system that tried to destroy her now wanted her to fix it. She didn't sign yet, just said she needed the weekend. She walked home through downtown as the sun dipped behind glass towers. The same streets that used to feel like escape routes now felt like avenues of arrival. At 8:43 p.m., her phone buzzed. A known number. She answered. "Ms. Vance." The voice was deep, calm, and direct. "My name is Special Agent David Chin with the Office of the Inspector General. We're conducting a joint investigation into procurement fraud and internal misrepresentation within Stellar Flow's executive branch." Tessa's spine straightened. "We've reviewed your deposition," David continued. "We believe there's a pattern of falsified approval documentation and financial manipulation linked to Mr. Mitchell, possibly others. We'd like to speak with you, this time as a key witness." Key witness. She said nothing for a moment, just watched her reflection in the black mirror of her TV screen. "You believe this is criminal?" she asked finally. "That's what we're trying to determine," David replied. "But we've seen enough to ask the question." She exhaled lowly. "I'll cooperate," she said. "Tell me where and when." As she hung up, she felt it settle in her bones. Not fear, not doubt, readiness. She wasn't done yet. Gavin had tried to rewrite the story. Now she was going to write the final chapter herself. The courtroom was colder this time, not just in temperature, but in tone, heavier, more surgical. This wasn't civil mediation or a private deposition behind glass walls and decaf coffee. This was federal, the kind of room where real consequences live, where names go into records and don't come out. Tessa walked in wearing navy, hair tied back. No binder in hand, no manila folders. She didn't need armor anymore. She was the blade now. Gavin sat at the defense table, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they regretted accepting the case. He was paler, thinner, a man who'd once walked through boardrooms as if he owned the oxygen, now reduced to flinches and furtive glances. His tie was still there, but it hung limp around his collar like a noose that hadn't been pulled tight yet. The prosecutor stood. "Ms. Vance, when did you first become aware of the rerouting strategy being approved through unofficial channels?" Tessa met his eyes. "February 6th. Gavin Mitchell sent me an email instructing me to implement changes immediately. He stated he would handle optics if legal twitches." A click. The screen behind her lit up. There it was again. The email. The one she'd printed, laminated, survived on. "Did you believe you were operating under official company approval?" "I did." The CFO was copied. The language was clear. There was no ambiguity. "And when did you discover that these actions had been reframed to suggest you had acted unilaterally?" She looked at Gavin, just for a moment. "The day I was called into deposition prep and told to stay aligned with the team's version." The prosecutor didn't smile. He didn't need to. The jury already had. By the end of her testimony, Gavin couldn't look at her. When they read the indictment, fraud, perjury, and obstruction of a federal inquiry, he finally slumped. Stellar Flow Systems settled out of court 2 weeks later. No press conference, no apology, just a quiet wire transfer and a string of half-hearted statements about corporate restructuring and leadership realignment. The layoffs began that Friday. No names announced, just suddenly empty cubicles and darkened screens. Liam sent her a message. "I'm staying for now, but the building feels haunted." Tessa didn't respond. She was already unpacking in her new office. Top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline that cut cleanly through morning fog like truth through corporate spin. On her desk, a welcome gift. A sleek frame, brushed metal. Inside it, a printed copy of the original email, the one that had once felt like a death sentence. Across the top, a bright yellow sticky note. "Thank you for being brave. DV." She read it once, smiled without showing her teeth, and set it beside her monitor like a trophy. Her calendar was already full. Meetings with Fortune 100 clients, internal policy overhauls, compliance boot camps for C-suite executives who now lived in fear of becoming the next Stellar Flow. At 3:06 p.m., as she sipped coffee by the window, a muted television in the corner flickered to a news segment. Breaking. Key witness in landmark corporate case. Now leads compliance initiative for Fortune 100 clients. Tessa stared at the headline. Then she turned, sat back at her desk, and started writing the next chapter. This time, in her own name. This story powerfully demonstrates that truth, even when buried and manipulated, has a way of surfacing. Tessa's journey highlights the importance of meticulous record-keeping and unwavering integrity, especially in environments where power is abused. It teaches us that resilience in the face of injustice is not just about survival, but about actively reclaiming your narrative and ensuring accountability. The positive message is clear. Never underestimate the power of your own truth and the courage to speak it. Even when you feel isolated and targeted, your dedication, your evidence, and your commitment to ethical conduct can expose corruption and lead to profound change. By standing firm and refusing to be silenced, you can not only protect yourself, but also inspire others and contribute to a more just and transparent professional world.